Thanks again to Riccardo Luna. This morning we started the day at the University of Venice with a special dedication to the urban environment, the cities in particular. This afternoon we'll have specifically some workshop for Italian cities, exactly to understand how it's possible to declinate adaptation at local level, especially considering the relationship between built and natural environment, and how the different components, especially looking at coastal cities or in general cities that have relationship with water, can counteract the impact of climate change. I would like to call here with me also the Andrea Rinaldo, Prize Nobel for Water, Stockholm Prize, and professor at University of Padua, president of the Institute Veneto of Arts, Piero Lionello, professor at University of Salento, but the strong Venetian's background in all the dimension. I would like to. Both Andrea and Piero are very, how can I say, strong, oriented scholars on the different phenomena related to the relationship between water and climate change from different perspectives, different disciplines, but with a special attention to Venice and the Lagoon of Venice. Both of them have studied the system of Venice from the different perspective, from the hydraulic point of view, and also from the ecological system in some way, in particular Piero, in the last few decades. Their position in the last few months in particular generated a strong debate at national and international level, especially looking at the future of these cities. There are 2 points in particular that maybe could be considered with specific attention. One of these is the functioning of Moses system. Nowadays we have a system that is essentially permits to reduce the impact of tide, that we have to recognize that tide is a natural phenomenon, is not sea level rise, that is totally another matter, in the Lagoon of Venice. Both of them have provided perspective for the future, the impact on cultural heritage, the impact on the management of the lagoon, the potential risk of sea level rise, and the long-term solution for Venice. The first question I would like to ask to both of them from different perspectives, which is, in your point of view, the long-term path that we have to start now for Venice, considering that the MOSE is a temporary solution, is something that would be useful for some decades, has not been designed specifically for sea level rise, has been designed for a natural phenomenon in a certain perspective. Both the position of Piero and Andrea generated, I mentioned before, a strong debate. The last paper that Piero issued on nature was being probably taken just a few last 2 lines by the journalist, and they simply summarized that Piero was proposing to move Venice in another place, especially in the mainland. In reality, the paper is more articulated, and in the last part of the paper expect that in case of extreme sea level rise in the long-term perspective, maybe we can also think about the possibility to move away some cultural heritage remains, in particular, if looking at Venice. And also, Andrea mentioned in different interviews and different studies in the last years, the attention to keep in mind that Venice as a built environment should be maintained, otherwise the risk is that it could be declined very quickly, or especially in the material and material point of view. So in your perspective, which is the strategy and the path that we would start now to imagine a Venice in a medium and long term? We'll start with Andrea and Piero. What's that? Yeah.
I can start for sure.
I started with A.
A.
I started with A. Okay, so Andrea has some presentation.
As long as I have my slides, of course. Do I? Yes, okay. So, first of all, just to praise the concept which is behind the Venice Climate Week, and I would like to quote as beginning a big misleading concept that comes from art and science. In fact, the painter Georges Braque, about a century ago, wrote that art disquiets and science reassures. This is it. And science reassures. I think it's exactly the opposite today, and we are no consolators. And in reality, science has to be blunt about what's happening. So the first thing that I'd love to do is just like a journey on a few images that talk to us about the Anthropocene and what we're seeing in the system. One this is in the north of the world, in which you do see actually the Anthropocene pitching in and see white bears just scavenging garbage, which is a sign of, okay, or pictures like these. I hope that my pictures will be bigger, but it doesn't matter. Or pictures like these, which is like a snapshot of the Anthropocene, what's happening now, and the climate change pitching into things that are invisible to everybody. And but I wanted to introduce this about the cryosphere, because the vanishing cryosphere, which is a fact, which we see obviously, is somewhat misleading with respect to what I'll be soon getting into, which is the issue of a city of Venice. And because why? Because in reality, I mean, transgression and regressions of a cryosphere has been the norm through history and beyond. For instance, in the Alps, where you see this picture, which is a boundary between Italy and Switzerland. What happens is that, of course, you know that Hannibal, in fact, crossed with elephants in a particularly warm period to invade and attack the empire, or the passes that have been free of ice for centuries, etc. But what happens is, so in a sense, a false sense that the merchants of doubt that had been mentioned even before in the very informative, in fact, sessions about the communication of science, would tell you that it's always happened. But these clouds the fact that to change by 4 degrees, there was certainly a period in the history of this planet in which the temperatures, the temperature, the atmospheric temperature was much higher than now. But to change by 4 degrees, it would take 1 million years, not 50 years, like we've seen and as I will be showing you in a minute. So this brings us to Venice. This is next to here, which is Palazzo Cavalli Franchetti, not far from here, like a 10 minutes walk. And which is interesting for 2 respects. First of all, the cunning photographer, a distinguished Venetian, in fact, capsized the picture as you see it here. It was taken during COVID, and for a specific reason I'm mentioning this. If you look at the reflected image is up, and the real image is below, because it was in full daylight. It was the suspended period of a lockdown that characterized the COVID period, which you remember fairly well. And why this is relevant to the whole discussion about what's next for Venice is because, of course, the plagues and pandemics had been the norm. If you think that, for instance, in the 16th century Black Plague that halved the population of Venice, of course, but literally almost half the population of Europe at that time. But to become pandemic, that took 45 to 50 years. It took only 1 flight from Wuhan to Toronto to become pandemic. So the key word that we have to keep in mind is the acceleration of change, is the rapidity of changes that where we see in the process. And to do so, just please don't mind about the units, but try to figure this very important images of economic, socioeconomic, and turbation of the biosphere measures. I don't care about you following the details, but look at the general trend of what you're seeing here. You have a huge number of indicators, be them population, be them GDP, whatever you want to call it, be it the use of water, use of energy, whatever you have, or and this is only for socioeconomic indicators of various kinds, etc. Forget about the units. But take a look at the trend. That means they became famous as the hockey stick diagrams, because it means that for about 300 years since the Enlightenment and the first systems we had to measure objectively the world surrounding us, you have that nothing has changed. It's a quiet hollow scene that starts from the beginning of the 17th century, to say 18th, like to now, 300 years of nothing changes, a quiet hollow scene. And all of a sudden, all these indicators anywhere in the world start jumping up. And that's the tipping point reached. That means that we touched a point, a no return, if you want to have it, and something in which this will remain very nice. By the way, this I learned it from a beautiful Crutzen lecture given by Thomas Stocker, which I thought would have been here today. And this is for the socioeconomic indicators, but that applies to turbation of the biosphere of all kinds. That could be, of course, in the reduction to a single factor is the concentration of greenhouse gases, be them CO2, be them methane, be them any other kind of compound, etc. But any measure of the turbation of the biosphere has exactly the same trend. Don't care about units or whatever. Care about the fact that nothing has changed for 3 centuries, and all of a sudden it started jumping up. And that's the sense of that. So the message is the rapidity of changes is exactly what makes this condition particularly special. And I'm getting now to what are the consequences for the environment that surrounds us, which is the thing in here. So another thing, because besides the important, well, it doesn't go, it's supposed to be starting automatically, doesn't matter. What you have, like the Grace measures, is something in which you do see that this is not a state of mind, this is not a model, this is not theory, this is measured values that are telling you that if you look at the loss of in gigatons of ice lost by Greenland, particularly important for strategy, for general reasons, etc., something which is quite important. And this is relevant to Venice because should we have an event which is not zero probability at the moment, but it's growing up, if you check what Rockström is saying there, the acceleration, especially in the Baltic areas, especially in the north of the world, is accelerating in at an unprecedented pace, and much worse than we expected, in a sense. That means that if we have a complete loss of the ice masses in Greenland, that would generate a sea level rise of the order of 7 meters globally, with regional differences. But we're talking about 7 meters. 7 meters surrounding us. And I'm getting to the point that we will have to have. So the concept, for most of you, I don't know for some of you, but this is more or less what we are now. That's the shape of the place we're in. In particular, this is Piazza Marco, exactly next to you, is there with the sort of the bathymetry, which is the lowest part of the city, and this is what it used to be, exactly where we are, right on the right. This is Procuratia Vecchia, and that's what you see on the right of that picture in there. That was the norm before the man put down heavily to treat the issue of a protection of the city against exceptionally high storm surges in the Adriatic region, which was the main problem then. And add to that, to get to that stage, it was something like 6 billion spent by the Italian government and the likes for a work, the MOSE, the barriers that are protecting against storm surges, that are doing wonderfully well their job. And you have to figure out that I'm old enough to have been in one of those panels that pushed very promptly forward the project, because if the problem of Venice was that of protecting against exceptionally high tides, there has never been any alternative to interruption between the exchange between the sea and the lagoon, temporary effect at that time. But that's where we are now, essentially. And what I'm trying to say is that there is an urgent sense that something else, a new mindset is needed to preserve the city as we see it now. And the death knell comes from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. And the regional studies published in 2023 in those appendices in there, in which you see in here, what you see in here is the sea level rise measured. The black curve is measured. It's not a prediction, it's not a model, it's what happened from the beginning of a century to now. And the others are scenarios. Models don't do predictions. Models do scenarios. And the scenario for what is called in the jargon of IPCC is called reference concentration pathway, which is RCA, whatever it is, etc., which is watts per square meter radiation, which is an assumption of what's going to come in terms of concentration of greenhouse gases, and the main issue, which is the global warming that you have in place. So you have systems of this kind, and you have that by the end of a century. You're looking at the center with a rapidity whose pace is unknown yet, but certainly there are major concerns about an acceleration which is much bigger than expected. You're going to have something that by the end of a century, you're going to have a meter more of sea level rise. And why this is a death knell for the city, unless we start moving really fast and finding out what's needed, if you want Venice to last, because that's exactly what is at stake. And that in particular what happens is taken from Professor Marani, who's sitting there actually, which I took it from him, and there's a direct translation between the sea level rise, and of course the number of closures in which you have to operate, the Mose barriers, the barriers that protect against storm cities, which is directly related to the level of a rising seas. And what happens is the following: by the end of a century, you're going to have on average 262 closures a year, just by simple translation. If you were capable of doing that, you have to close virtually everything. And that's why the sense of urgency that this pushes is not felt appropriately, in my view, nor in town nor anywhere else. Because with a meter more sea level rise, you cannot close 260 beaches, almost literally always closed the Mose, for two reasons. First, you wouldn't be able to maintain the Mose because the number of closures exceeds the capability we have to keep it in function, no more than 50 per year. Second, you won't have any maritime activity within the lagoon, which is an important thing, of course, because the maritime activity for about a millennium has been the backbone of the innovation on the richness of the city. So no navigation, because no sensible, a maritime company would be counting on a port in which you do not have the access for almost every day. And the other thing is that you won't have a lagoon, because a system which is closed that often would be losing its character of ecosystem, a transition ecosystem. So with all the loss of natural capital which is associated with that, all kinds of ecosystem services that provided the lagoon. And mind you, the lagoon was protected at all costs by Venetians through the millennia for reasons that range from sanitary to military defense to beauty. And that will be gone. Finally, and I'm not done yet, see, that's why science disquiets. That's the maritime activity you have seen, we like it or not. These are the ecosystem services, even beauty. Even the beauty of the residual tidal landforms in the lagoon are astonishing. And one of the reasons why, in fact, you should be counting on that with great interest. And last but not least, and I want our Generali hosts to listen carefully, the city will rot away, whether you like it or not, if you don't do anything. And I'm saying that to Generali because he's the biggest real estate owner in town. And I know I don't like it, I overdo a lot for Venice, etc. But this is a different issue. We're talking about, should we decide whether or not the city will last? Because what happens is the following. When you have a salt water touching at levels, the 15,000 units of the cities, what makes the structure of the factory of a city, the 15,000 houses that make out the work of art of the work admires. What happens is that once you have this capillary rise in the system, then when water evaporates, the salt accumulates in the structure. And the cycles of recrystallization and re-wetting of that generate a disturbance to the structure thing that generates effect of this kind. This happened like, oh, by the way, I haven't told you, but I'm Venetian. I was born and raised here. This is very, very, about 100 meters from my house, actually. And this is the thing that you have to keep in mind. So you won't have maritime activity, you don't have a lagoon, you don't have ecosystem services, including the natural capital, and you won't have a city unless we act. And also because this is also a nice picture, this walk, and I forgot to say that the pictures are taken from the France Press exposition organized by il FAI, Fondo per l'Ambiente Italiano, al Forte di Bardes. It was a beautiful exposition of pictures of this kind, etc., that shows the effects of that. Reason being, there is a physical law that is telling you that for every degree more of temperature of the atmosphere, that atmosphere can withhold from 6 to 8% of water vapor with it, generating all kinds of intense events. And it's something which is la casalinga di Voghera knows perfectly well. Always warmer generates a situation in which you have more intense effects. And so this is, and I'm rapidly going to the closure of that, something thinking about the future of Venice and a model of social economic development which comes with that. But mind you, something else which is quite important, but is, my take is that we should open our minds, we should think of how to deal with the chronic problem which is affecting the city. Will be a death knell for the city unless we act, and we act promptly because of that. But figure that in the 14th century, as you see in here, you would have like thousands of lagoons festooning the northern Adriatic. And the point is that all of them disappeared but two. Why? Because man engineered them. The lagoon is an engineering artifact. Would have disappeared 300 years ago unless we do that. So we have to get into the mindset to think what is right for the conservation of a city. And that's the city. That's the city as we see in here. Should we expect something of that kind, like in the monsoon, soon enough, with these islands, which generates like a higher place in which to return, etc. Again, the science is not the scientist is not a consolator. And what happens in here, science disquiets. Art has to imagine and has to comfort. And I'm finishing it with John Ruskin, which I think is still a good lesson, which I have misinterpreted for a long time, etc. What happens is that you remember that in The Stones of Venice, it's a super nice bestseller, 1851, in which he was talking about the death knell of a city generated by the sound of the waves on the stones that you had in the system. But what happens which is particularly interesting in my view, is that it's the disregard of man what worried at the time John Ruskin. But if the city survived, and the question is, will it rise again from the lagoon? It's exactly the point, as Ruskin put it in. It's not, and it happened because disregard was overcome, and because men decided to operate and to have it float, being afloat again. And that's the reason why it is. If Venice is afloat, it's not because Ruskin was wrong, but because he was heeded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this vision that put on the table different of our problems and issue. We try to, I give you immediately the floor to Piero to provide the other perspective, and then we try to finalize the some reflection about the two visions. Yeah, we start exactly from there. Thanks.
Okay, so first, thank you to Riccardo for the opportunity of being here today. And well, first I want to assure everyone, I am Venetian. Regretfully, I don't spend as much time in Venice as I would like to, but I am absolutely not proposing, neither the author are proposing of moving Venice somewhere else. That was an accurate extrapolation of the content of a paper in some media. And also thank you, Francesco, for your question, which are the pathway, so what is the pathway, that was your question, for the medium and long range. I thank you for the question, but I don't want to answer the question, because it is not really important what would be my preferred pathway, because one of the messages, the message, I would say, of this paper, it is that there are several pathways ahead. Several strategies can be adopted. Which one will be selected, will be decided? Depends on citizens, depends on policy making, depends on governance. It's something that has to be based on science, but also considers criteria that goes beyond science, criteria of values that need to be preserved. Maybe I could even stop now with this talk, but I have prepared my presentation, so I'm going to eventually bore you for about 15 minutes. I say that for keeping myself on the safe side, because of course, having prepared that, I don't think at all it is boring, but maybe. So that's the reason, actually, why I'm here, this paper. And it is a paper based on a group. It is a teamwork. And science, when it is used well, it is an exceptional tool for reaching consensus. And here, I had the privilege of gathering a team of excellent scientists that have made their assessment on the future that is ahead in Venice. So Venice is unique, and I don't want I don't think I need to defend this time here. But the sort of risk that is ahead of Venice, the driver is shared by many other cities. But if you look at the details, actually, the risk, the hazard, the driver is the same, sea level rise. But local realities do matter. And apart from my Venetian strong feeling, patriotism, call it as you wish, Venice is unique, and it is also in the decision of UNESCO when it was decided to have it as a heritage site. It is unique because you have a cultural heritage, you have a monument, but you have also an environment around that. You have activities, you have history, you have culture, you have tradition, you have the citizens. All of that is so strongly intertwined. It is strongly connected. So the ambition would be to just to keep it as it is. Would that be possible? Here, the paper, the article, the team has provided a framework for discussing the future. So the goal is not to say, this is the best solution, but on which ground the different strategies should be compared. Because strategy differs, their suitability depends on different thresholds of sea level rise. They preserve different values. Today, we have MOSE. MOSE is working, and we should take advantage of the time that MOSE is giving to us. So the question, it is sea level rise. Which strategies will remain sustainable as sea level will continue to rise? So it is not a point of saying it is doomed, everything will be lost. It will not be possible to live here beyond the 23rd century. It is to decide where we want to go. What is sustainability? And sustainability is not only technical feasibility, because it depends on what you want to support. So here we are unique heritage of different values that we would like to maintain. That they are the community and its traditions. Sometimes we forget about that. And of course, another point that it is maybe I'm anticipating future slides, those sort of traditions are not at risk only because of sea level rise. There are many drivers that are actually putting at risk all this very unique heritage. So here it is the big driver, the sea level rise. Okay, it is an uncertain driver, but everyone knows, and it was also in the previous presentation, that sea level will increase. You can't build a model telling you that sea level will stop growing in the next decades or in the next centuries. So the question it is not if it will grow, but how much it will grow. And while on the short time range, you can be, by the end of this century, between 0.4 meters and 1 meter, no one believes anymore, actually, about this lower boundary, 0.4 meters. On the long time range, then we are discussing about 1 meter or many meters. And there is a line, this doesn't show up in this paper, which is the line of so-called unlikely but plausible futures, that by the end of this century tells 1.8 meters. And by the end of this diagram, well, says 15 meters. Okay? And that's the catastrophic collapse of the Antarctic and Greenland ice cliffs that was already mentioned before. Here it is Mose, the aerial view of a lagoon with the inlets. Here below, it is what I think was the very first time Mose was operated. Sea level, there are the lines describing the sea level. You can clearly see two groups of lines. The lines describing the sea level outside of the lagoon going up, the sea level inside the lagoon, Chioggia, Punta della Dogana, they stop rising. So Mose works. It is being a very controversial project, but I don't think there are Venetians complaining about it now. But sea level will put a limit to Mose, okay? Because as sea level increases, the duration and the frequencies of closures will increase. And there is, I make it short, a threshold here, which is about 75 centimeters of sea level rise. That would imply that 50% of times Mose will have to be closed. When we cross that line, the operative question will not be, should we operate Mose today? But should we open the lagoon today? Okay. Of course, the critical time for that would arrive much earlier. You can see that with 50 centimeters, already you are expected to operate Mose for 2 months in a year. 2 months that are not randomly spread across the year, but will be concentrated in autumn and early winter. So here are the different possibilities that has been considered by the team of experts. You have the present situation on top, ring diking. I will be back to that later, okay? Separating the city center from the rest of the lagoon. The sea level probably is not so clear there, but it is a blue line that those of you who had good eyesight can see it. Then there is a closed lagoon with a modest dam on the front, or a more ambitious super levees. And finally, the retreat, that what we would never like to consider. But I think it is a sort of taboo that should be removed. We should give for granted that it will be possible to, under any situation and the under sea level rise value, to keep Venice where it is and as it is. So, opportunities, possibilities. First, let's consider the possibility of extending the lifetime of a present system with periodic closing of a lagoon. There are potentials for that. One, it has well known in the literature, it was elevating the ground by about 50 centimeters, if we want to push it to the eventual limit to be considered, okay? Never tested anywhere on this scale, so it's not something that should be given for granted that it will work. The other two figures shows interventions that, while elevation of individual buildings, it has been done massively in some towns, Chicago. Of course, here would have some architectural and technical characteristics that were not present in other areas. But it is possible. You cut a building, so to say, put it on some system lifting it, and then you fill the gap again. In Chicago, I think buildings have been lifted by up to 2 meters. The second one is a not very elegant representation, my capability with AI is limited, of what has already been implemented for the Basilica of San Marco, an individual protection of a building. You will see the problem with these sort of interventions. They can be very effective for individual buildings, but they fragment the structure of a city. It will be part, it will be protected. So the idea, it is actually that you can increase the critical threshold for operating the MOSE. But at that critical threshold, part of the city will be flooded, part of the city will be protected. So how do you govern this sort of connection between the two parts? It is fragmentation. So there are limits to that, of course. And then ring dikes. Okay. An aerial view of how might like Venice under a ring dike. You see, it is a completely different perception of a lagoon around Venice. It is like if Venice would need to be protected by the lagoon. They call it fortress city sometimes, okay? Well, of course it has advantage, many advantages. It's technically feasible, relatively cheap compared with all other solutions. It has to be accompanied, integrated with other measures, wastewater treatment, pumping, of course. There is an unpleasant side effect, maybe psychological, maybe not real. The barriers are quite close to the urban area. Whatever technical failure would mean flooding within few minutes. So, an issue with security. Transforming the lagoon into a coastal lake. From the hydraulic point of view, very effective. Here it is representing the more dramatic scenario, just to attract your attention. Here you have this super levee that can also actually be a place where we have buildings, fields, can be inhabited. But then the lagoon will become a coastal lake. It will be something completely different from the ecological system we have now. And of course, we're thinking about that for sea level rise of the order of 5, 10 meters. At that point, the issue will not be only to protect Venice. In this situation, Venice would be, if considered in its isolation, a sort of bathtub, okay, surrounded by other areas, and those areas are actually below sea level. So the point at this point, there are huge extension of area going from Monfalcone to Ravenna, which are already below sea level. Now they are maybe a few meters, up to 5 meters below sea level. In this situation, they will be 15 meters below sea level. So this sort of defense at this point is not just organizing the defense of Venice, it is reorganizing the defense of the whole North Adriatic coast. And first, what we actually, it is maybe disturbing. When I made it, I found it somehow disturbing. It is the relocation. And the idea it is, well, relocation, that's not Venice, of course. Venice on a hill may be close to Asolo, okay? but that's not Venice. Surrounded by vineyards, that's not Venice. And of course, there is also a price of what it will left that can't be transferred, and that's Madonna del Lorto, one of the churches that I like very much. If it will not be dismantled and rebuilt, it will be left somewhere. Maybe sort of scuba tourism for a while, but of course, it will not last long. So different strategies have different times for their implementation. I said time, but I would say sea level, because it's the sea level that actually is governing everything. The timing of sea level is governed by the emission scenarios. So you see on top, we have the present situation. We might hope to keep it maintaining with all accommodation and integration up to 1.5 meters. Then we have in green what are the transformations, ring dikes, closed lagoon, coastal lake, and then we have a retreat. Sea level on the bottom, below that, the time scale, which tells you, well, if there is an effective mitigation, we might even we might even never reach 1.5 meters. So everything could continue relatively similar to the situation now with integration and other accommodation measures. But in the other bottom line, high emission scenarios, there is that dramatic 15 meters level that can be reached in about 300 years. And looking at strategy, of course, there are different costs. Also, we shouldn't give it for granted that the economical resources for that will be always available. They are available now. Now we're talking about Venice, a developed country, rich Europe. Will be the same in 100 years? We don't know. But also another point, it is which values you want to preserve. Because if the present strategy clearly can preserve, you see there are greens on all the different goals on the left corresponding to the present strategy. In that case, we can save everything, but if you go to ring dikes, well, very good for the ecosystem, but the connection between the lagoon and Venice is completely changed. Port activities has to be changed, many things has to be changed. The coastal lake is a completely different environment. I mean, there will be no more Ecce in Burano with the coastal lake, okay? A lot of the attitude that also makes so attractive Venice will disappear. And of course, then there is the relocation. Relocation may preserve some things, but, well, I would say it will not be Venice. It will be how to go to a museum, look into Egyptians' items, and thinking that you are seeing old Egypt. You are just looking at what is left after 5,000 years. So conclusions. I think unless mitigation is very successful, in any case, it will need an effort and thinking in the next decades. We have to be ready for a future that will be different from the past. This doesn't seem that the city we're living is doomed, okay? It will be flooded, abandoned, but we can't look at a simple, smooth continuation of the present. The Mose protects Venice, but it cannot address all future scenarios for extreme sea level rise. It might resist for a couple of centuries, maybe even beyond, but it might also be over in 50 years from now. 50 years, by the way, has been the time since the approval of a special law for Venice to the first operativity of Mose. So it took 50 years. It means that the threshold, the time separating us from the threshold, is the same time that separates us now from when the society began talking about Mose. Each strategy of the others preserves some values, sacrifices others. So you can say that each strategy would make a different Venice. And so we're now preparing for the end of this century and beyond, means deciding which Venice we want to make possible. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have 30 seconds to, I prefer to give you all the time necessary to present the vision that especially related to your point of view. I want to just use one of the last comments made by Piero related to adaptation is not only a technical issue, it's probably one of a crucial perspective. It's a crucial perspective because otherwise we think that with the technology we can solve everything. Instead, in the long-term process, the relationship with the ecosystem is totally true that we say that the Venice Lagoon is something of regulated. We refer to the Venice Lagoon with something regulated. But the long-term perspective outlined by Andrea and Piero probably could force us to take a more complex strategy for the long term that is not just connected to a technical solution. In 10 seconds each, a takeaway message. Yeah, and then we close. Just if you have a comment, so finish here.
Well, I would say that a sustainable pathway is not just to protect the monument. It's protect a society, civilizations that has made of this coexistence of an environment, the lagoon, and the urban center, Venice, its trademark that makes it famous at global scale.
In 1301, the Doge Pietro Ziani put up a deliberation to abandon the city. You know that? In the transfer to Constantinople, it passed, it was rejected by a short margin. It's not the first time we knew about fragility about it. But we completely agree. We may have different things. The only reservation I have, I do not believe in relocation in any case, because I think it's the city that has to be conserved, what it is. The thing is that, but we all agree on the fact that as we speak, we do not have a solution yet. We have to open to the world the discussion. We have to see whoever has ideas on how to do that. And to open a consultation which is broad enough, we need ideas. We need a new, fresh mindset. And I'm confident that we'll have Venice afloat again.